Hello everyone. Today we have with us a very special guest from Catheon Gaming. Lewis is a chief operating officer at Catheon Gaming, a top Web3 gaming platform with over 25 games on their platform currently to be launched. So, welcome, Lewis.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, Ashmeet. It's great to be here.
So, Lewis, let's start onto the question. The first question that I have for you is how is the Web3 or blockchain game basically different from the current gaming space or the current Web2 games? What's the difference between both of them?
Yeah, sure thing. There can be quite a few differences, and it does vary a lot by game in terms of how that's been designed to take advantages of the Web3 aspects. The key ones are obviously around ownership of game assets through the use of NFTs. Having those on chain allows users to hold those and use them and transact with them both within the game as well as outside of the game and on third-party platforms. So by its nature, it means that Web3 games are part of a very open ecosystem approach. In terms of the actual gameplay and the game economies, you can allow for much more open economies with interactions and inflows from outside of the game as well as in-game transactions, and so this opens up a lot of other use cases around monetization and value sharing with the player base, so allowing players to profit from the game economy if they perform certain actions or add value to the economy in different ways.
All right, that sounds good. So what are the current challenges that the Web3 gaming is actually solving, with the blockchain technology, that you mentioned? The game economics is increasing. So how is the blockchain actually helping? And if you can explain it from a technical perspective, that would be great.
Yeah, so in terms of the way games, traditional non-blockchain games are set up today, right? It's a very centralized and closed system. Typically, the game development company has, absolute control over everything within the game and the economy, and can, essentially delete your assets or change the values of them at any time, and with very little recourse on the part of the users. And a lot of the best of the game economy and the system itself are also very opaque. And so as a user, it's actually very hard to get a sense for what the broader economy is doing, and sometimes even what other players are doing within the game.
Right.
And so for certain types of games in particular, that type of economic transparency would actually be of a lot of benefit, and you get that by its nature in Web3. The other things are around competitive gameplay and leaderboards, where right now the esports address that, but it's only for the very top 1% of players, and it's very formalized fiat based, which for international or cross country transactions can be very slow and high fees. And having a blockchain based economy means that you can actually facilitate payments basically in real time and allow people to win prizes or compete against each other for value very, very naturally.
So can you explain more about what actually decentralization is? And also the term that I have heard a lot of these times that comes to me is interoperability, or the connections of assets. So how is this decentralization and interoperability working? And if you can explain both the terms to our viewers, so that would also be great.
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, the two terms are actually related to some extent. So decentralization in this context means that the essentially the ledger or the system used to validate ownership is distributed. It's not centrally controlled by one party. So rather than a single game company controlling the database of who owns what and what people can do with those items, it's actually recorded on the public blockchain, which means no single party is able to control that or change the entries on that. And so that allows people to no longer need to have all of their trust tied up in that one company that's operating the ledger. Interoperability is a really interesting one because it's basically the concept that you're able to use assets or items from one game or one developer and use them in other use cases. So that works both ways. For example, if I have assets from one game, perhaps they can be used in some other game, and that other game's assets can also be used in my game. And so this kind of ties back to what I was talking about in terms of an open economy. There's a lot of freedom for parties to be able to develop and add on and in some ways kind of mod the gameplay of games to use other items that are not necessarily the ones that have been originally issued by the game company. So this is something that's still relatively nascent in the ecosystem because a lot of the games are still in their early stages, but I think in the future could become a very big area where you can have a lot of essentially user-generated content created on-chain and spin-off games that leverage existing game assets that are out there.
So correct me if I understood it well. So interoperability in the basic sense means, like, for example, it basically solves the limitations that current gaming industry possesses. That is, like, if I am not actually the true owner of my asset or any in-game asset that I might have purchased or something like that, and there is a dependability on that game as well, because suppose if that game somehow gets shut down or there is some downfall on that game, my assets are actually going to get vanished with the demolishment of that game. But with Web3, what I understand is, for example, if I own any asset, usually most of them are in the form of NFTs. I can actually, for example, even if the game shuts down, I can take that asset to some different game, or I can use it for some other purpose. Or even if there is no utility attached to that NFT outside that game, I can still sell that asset as an NFT, because NFT itself has a collectible value to it, right?
Yeah, you essentially have a permanent record of what your account holds, and that will survive any single game or any single company. And to extend your example, you could have a game shut down, but then maybe the community spins up a new version of it, and everyone basically transposes their assets into that game and keeps on playing without the support of the original developer.
So this seems to me like the blockchain gaming space has endless possibilities for it. Can you talk about the possibility of how is Web3 or blockchain gaming enhancing the user experience or the gamer's experience in playing those games? What are the major developments in the experience from a user's perspective or a gamer's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the things we talked about are big benefits for gamers. So, being able to essentially, buy any kind of items within the game or within with the on-chain assets of a game. So there's a lot of cool kind of extensions of that I think we might see in the future. For example, just the ability to sell maybe your progress within a game, or leveling up your items. In a lot of games, right, there might be a lot of in-game transactions where people are buying items already, but once you buy them, you aren't able to ever sell them in a Web2 game. And so, if you've spent a lot of time and money in a certain game, and maybe you're kind of retiring from playing that game, or you want to start a new account and start from the beginning, you can actually monetize that time and money that you've already put in by selling that to someone else. And so that will free up money for you to maybe spend again in the game, recontributing to the economy, or in another game, rather than being fully kind of sunk cost.
So another thing that comes to me, like when I think about this gaming space, is like how is it different? Like how the development process is different from the traditional games. Like, is there any additional steps that are added to Web3 gaming with the like keeping traditional games in space in their place, or is it like the whole process has like been completely changed? Like how is that working on?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like maybe 80% of the effort and development process is basically the same. The core principles around designing a good game, creating unique graphics and storyline for it, putting it together in a way that works, and testing that with users is unchanged. What is changed and what does add additional work in a Web3 context is the game economy itself. There's often a lot more complexity, a lot more considerations, especially given that open economy. You need to build in a lot more flexibility for the economy to be adaptable and versatile for external shocks. And so that needs to come into the design phase from quite early on, and will also come back in the testing phase when you're making sure that it works in practice how it was modeled to work in the beginning. And then of course the blockchain aspects, needing to having the game interact with smart contracts to facilitate the creation, burning, transferring of NFTs based on actions within the game. And so that that requires some specialist coding knowledge, or in the case of what we do at Catheon Gaming, partnering with someone who has the SDK or plugin already developed, which can make that step a lot easier if you're a game company who is just wants to focus on the game aspects and then wants to have a specialist company like ours take care of the Web3 aspects.
Like as you mentioned that an additional step has been added, like of monetizing the assets and the hard coding of transferable assets, and the web blockchain, basically the stuff that happens on the blockchain requires additional efforts. So how is this like how is the costs managed in this? Like is the cost transferred to the users or gamers? And in addition, like there is a very popular concept that I've found arose with this concept of blockchain gaming, that is play to earn. So for example, if I play a game, so how am I earning? Like I know that the game is going to reward me some tokens or some coins of that specific community, but how does that tokens possess a real world market value? So like how can I basically use those tokens in the real world economy?
Yeah, sure thing. So yeah, I mean, I guess the first principle around how value is shared within the economy, and how I guess like the costs of development are incorporated into that. So the I think the biggest difference with Web3 and the approach of Web3 native games is around sharing value through the ecosystem. So it's not just a one-way flow of value from users to the developers. And so the way that value is shared it can be multiple mechanisms, but essentially the ability to sell your items back into the economy, in addition to buying them, allows you to potentially like be a net earner in a few different ways. So obviously there's, I guess, the speculative value of like the natural volatility in the economy, where prices will fluctuate up and down, and being an early adopter of a game and its assets could potentially be beneficial if there's significant demand later on greater than the supply of assets within the game. The ways that these games are often designed to facilitate earning is in competitive gameplay, and so this can be in the form of tournaments or even kind of just direct P2P battling, where there is value at stake in the form of tokens or NFTs. And so based on your skill as a player, you can potentially monetize that by winning those competitions against other players and receiving value from that. And then in general there are like a whole bunch of kind of other mechanisms depending on the genre or style of gameplay, where maybe you can specialize in crafting certain types of items or things, kind of grinding certain aspects of gameplay that take a long time and selling those to more time poor players in a kind of classic kind of gold farming World of Warcraft style of economy.
Like I still have one confusion, or like that is like not just specific to gaming but a complete Web3 space as well. So how does a crypto token or coin actually derives value? And I'm not talking about the specific blockchains, like the chains on which these projects are listed or launched, but how does a crypto project, for example, if I own a game and I launch my token, so how is my token actually having a real world value, and why would someone be willing to pay for it in terms of dollars or like any fiat currency that is actually being used as a general, I would say, centralized currency that is actually being released by the government? So like why would someone be willing to pay for that, and how is those crypto tokens deriving that value?
Yeah, I mean, it's very, I guess, quite a fundamental or general question. Value in general is derived from scarcity, which is the balance between supply and demand. And so to kind of get to the core of that question, what is the demand for holding that token, and what are the supply dynamics? If you have a game where you need to own the token or hold the token in order to buy items or transact, there's obviously a natural demand as a medium of exchange. And then depending on the games themselves, there are often mechanisms around essentially burning the supply of tokens, or ways that essentially convert game revenues into value accrual for the token. And so if you think of it like in a traditional game, maybe you're spending money on in-app purchases, that money, rather than just going to the developer in a Web2 context, might be going to buy back and burn tokens, which is, the buyback is increasing that demand for the tokens, and the burning then decreases the supply. And so you've got this feedback loop where the popularity of the game and its ability to monetize, which is a dynamic that can be very profitable, as we've seen in the Web2 world, is basically redistributing that value to the holders of the token. And so in that way, you basically accruing the value of the game from customer demand through to the token.
That sounds interesting. So like it's more of an ecosystem or community-based approach that gives major value to Web3 games or the Web3 ecosystem in total, but it's more of like collaboration, community, and ecosystem. When all these things are combined together, the major derivation for Web3 projects come into, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think all of these core concepts or values around decentralization, interoperability, the whole community approach that you see in Web3, which is, I think, quite unique. It all kind of revolves around these same principles of shared value and cooperation within an ecosystem or an open economy.
Got it. That sounds interesting. Okay, now going back to the thing that you also mentioned, that you help gaming projects to get launched and you provide support to the games. So can you tell me like what Catheon Gaming is and like what exactly Catheon Gaming does?
Yeah, sure thing. So Catheon Gaming, we're a Web3 gaming ecosystem. And so what we do is we are partnering with game studios, both Web2 and Web3, but going particularly deep with traditional game studios who are looking to bring their games to Web3. And so what we allow them to do is, basically implement a lot of Web3 know-how and tools and practices, at a very high level through partnership. So they can focus on the core of, developing games. We help them with things like the game economy design, the blockchain technical integration, and a lot of the go-to-market and marketing and launch strategy for the games, and particularly on the Web3 side. And so we're putting that all together with our Catheon Gaming Center, which is it's a little bit like a Steam for Web3. It's a storefront combined with game launcher, a marketplace, and account management system that allows very easy onboarding process for gamers to come in, start playing these games, and interacting with the on-chain assets. The games themselves plug into our SDK, which allows them to easily create NFTs and connect to those on-chain accounts that users have. And the whole principle here is bringing together a lot of high-quality games from different genres and different platforms, aggregating all of the user attention and creating a frictionless ecosystem within that for players to discover games, for games to acquire users. And in the longer term, what we're working towards is a Catheon metaverse where all of the games are able to be represented and have their game assets within that metaverse, and essentially realize that vision around interoperability across the ecosystem.
So basically, when you help these games or like different gaming projects to get onboarded into the Web3 space or get launched into the Web3 space, how do you tackle the aspects of fairness and security in these games? Because from my understanding of the traditional games or the Web2 games, the concept of fairness and security is a major issue for the users, because a lot of times people face that their data might be leaked or used for some different purpose. The blockchain usually solves that purpose, but still, how is that security and fairness maintained in this game? So how does Catheon Gaming helps them in maintaining those aspects?
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, I would say like blockchain in general, and most of the ecosystem is quite user friendly in terms of those protections, and that it does allow much greater anonymity for users. You're not having to share too many sensitive details in order to interact with the crypto ecosystem in general and these Web3 games. And obviously that's always a particular concern anytime that you have, real world value and money involved, even more so than in a traditional Web2 context. So, that's really important. In terms of security, we have a very, rigorous process around code reviews and having smart contracts and tokens audited by security firms. We work closely with our development partners as well, just to ensure a secure setup, testing around that. All of your I guess classic gaming things around like anti-cheating and ensuring that the games can't be easily hacked, or at least hacked in a way that would kind of crash the economy, or allow funds to be hacked. So those are all like really important factors, and another reason why a lot of game studios choose us as a partner, so they're not having to kind of deal with these problems and solve them from scratch.
Yeah. So how does considering that more security is being provided to the games, and are the users or the gamers finding this Web3 interesting, or how are the users or gamers reacting to this new emerging market that has been released for them? So what is the mindset of the current Web3 gamers, or how is that evolution taking place? If you can share some insights on that.
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, I mean, I'd say the ecosystem and Web3 gaming as an industry in general is still in the very early stages of adoption. So a lot of the players and users in the ecosystem are those kind of classic early adopter type people. They're excited to try new things. They're relatively tolerant of testing and playing around with early stage products. They're very curious. They're always looking to kind of understand things in a fundamental way. So it's a great audience to have in terms of being able to test and iterate and get feedback from things. People are very vocal around where they see things that could be improved, or new ideas that you could implement. I think you have a few different kind of player cohorts or profiles, right? You have certain people who are particularly attracted by that potential to earn, and very focused around optimizing around that. You've got others who are more collectors, or call it speculators, or whales. Sometimes they're kind of looking to discover the next big thing and get in early on that. So you've got a lot of very curious and persistent people. I think as we grow as an industry and onboard more players and more people who are maybe new to the crypto space, that will obviously mature, and people's expectations around ease of use and being able to get a quick understanding of how things work and how to interact with these games and systems will need to be a lot smoother. And so that's a big focus of ours in terms of creating a really simple, straightforward onboarding process in terms of the customer journey. Because right now it's like if you're trying to bring someone into a Web3 game, they haven't touched crypto before, and your process requires them to have a wallet and have funds in that wallet. It's very hard to make that conversion and have people actually follow through to the end of the process. So that's a big thing that we're trying to solve to allow games to really scale their player bases.
Okay, So, like, how is this adoption rate increasing? Like you mentioned that the major reason this thing is like it's completely new space. So users are not actually like pretty much equipped with the knowledge or the right mindset to get into this thing, like to adopt to Web3 games or the complete Web3 ecosystem. So how do you think can we increase this adoption rate, and what could be the best practices that the Web3 companies can adopt to make this, I would say, to acclimatize the users of the Web3 space, that they get like they basically understand the stuff that's happened. So for a very basic example, if I'm a Web3 user, I'm a general Web2 user, and I'm looking to get into the Web3 space, and I do not know where to start. So what could be the best tip you would give me as a Web3 company, that what would be your approach to educate me in that field?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for starters, it's about making everything as simple as possible. And so, whilst there's a process of educating users to the extent that you can, solve their problems for them in advance, the better. So to give an example, if you want people to buy, your NFT or your game asset, it's maybe better to allow them to do that with a credit card than to say you have to hold ETH in your wallet and transact with ETH. And even that process around needing a wallet to hold the NFT, if you can create an onboarding system where a wallet is automatically created for them, so that if they don't already have one, it's basically sitting there for them ready to go, attached to their account, that's a much better user experience, and it's much easier to explain to someone what's happening and how it works than it is to say, oh hey, maybe go install MetaMask and work out how to add our chain to the app and all that jazz. So I would say it's around making it simple and communicating the value proposition in a way that doesn't rely on existing knowledge of crypto and how it works. And so, even talking about tokens and blockchains and that type of stuff, it's not necessarily something that has high relevance to a gamer from a Web2 perspective. And so, I would generally try to avoid that in your marketing language and the way you describe yourself in your game, because that's just going to confuse people or turn them off if they don't understand the words that you're using.
Okay, so basically it's more like the efforts are majorly required from the company side, right? Like the users, like as a company or a Web3 company, we need to understand the needs of the user and make it easy for them, right? Like that is the standard approach that would be a good for any Web3 company to attract users and make a mark in the market. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. And I think I think this is something that a lot of the industry does need to get better at, because a lot of people have done their initial launches and marketing very focused on existing Web3 or crypto holders, and whilst that is great in terms of attracting those very early adopters, it's something that needs to evolve as you try to scale to that next level of participation.
That's I guess really meaningful insight to me, because like even when we work on the marketing aspects, the majority of the target audience that we take is the crypto holders. But considering that the market is still evolving, a lot of people are still into that Web2 space. So instead of just focusing on that small market that we have at the moment, the tip that you shared can actually, I would say, increase the market range or the target audience for any Web3 company, any Web3 based company. And that I guess would be a great way to market and generate revenues and making a mark. So yeah, before we close, I just have a couple of more questions, and I guess I'll just ask them. Uh, so like, I just want to know what are the future plans for Catheon Gaming, and how do you see the blockchain gaming industry evolving in the coming years? Like, and how Catheon Gaming is going to, as we talked about, empowering the users or bringing in the users into the Web3 space. So, what's the vision of Catheon Gaming?
Yeah, sure thing. So our vision is basically to create the leading Web3 gaming ecosystem and drive Web3 gaming to mass adoption. In the short to medium term, our focus right now is about building the best collection of games and IP that we can around Catheon Gaming, and so that means talking to a lot of developers and game IP holders who maybe aren't currently doing stuff in Web3 and helping them enter the space, because it's around, if you want mass adoption from users, the first step is content and having a product that attracts them. And so by solving that problem and bringing in a lot of high quality content across, a whole range of genres and platforms, casts the widest net in terms of bringing in players from each of those. So like, for example, a lot of our games, there is an existing franchise or player base who have played prior versions of that game in terms of different releases, or in some cases working with games that have really big reach in terms of, say, existing TV series or IP. We're working with a major anime series that has a game. It's actually released in China. They want to publish it internationally, so we're internationalizing the game and looking to launch that to a greater audience. And so you can leverage, there are like tens of millions of people who have watched this series and millions who have played some of these games before. And so if you can bring in, some fraction of each of those from each of those games, onboard people into the Web3 ecosystem, demonstrate that value that you can bring around Web3 games so that they want to stick around and play more of those types of games, you can then start to build towards that mass adoption. Right now in the industry, if you look across the entire, gamer population in Web3, you're looking probably at best right now, maybe 1 million players. And success in traditional games for individual games is often measured in the tens of millions of players. And so, the opportunity is massive to grow the space, and it's only going to need, 1 or 2 initial breakout hits to start spinning that flywheel of adoption. So, yeah, for us, more games is more shots on goal for that breakout success, and then having the that whole platform of additional content for users as the way to engage and retain those users, and so that we can continue to build on that success.
Man, wow, that's an amazing vision to have for a company, and considering the challenging space we are working in right now, I wish you all the best for every development and every challenge that you're going to solve and make this industry big. And before we close this podcast, I just have one last question, and that is basically meant for the new upcoming game developers or the people who are actually much interested into gaming. So are there any tips that you would like to give gamers and developers that they can work upon to get into the space? Like, even if it's in terms of development, how can they get their hands at development, and what are the best steps to consider I would say, a popular game that is adopted by a lot of users, what would be your suggestions for that?
Yeah, I think like all of the same principles of what makes a great game in a general sense, in a Web2 sense, still hold true in the Web3 space. And so, don't go thinking that because it's Web3, you have to throw out the whole, rule book or playbook of how to make a great game. But at the same time, things do need to be adapted for Web3, and particularly around the economy and being thoughtful around what is put on chain and how users are able to access that. I would say there's a lot of great examples of people experimenting and doing stuff in the space. So it's not something that you need to necessarily approach completely from scratch. There's a lot of great advice out there. There's partners like ourselves who can help guide people through that process and enable them to, quickly focus in on what's the latest thinking around best practices and what are the options in terms of how these principles can be implemented. And so, if you're starting out in terms of entering the industry, there's a lot of options around being able to get great partners on who can quickly take care of the new aspects around Web3, so that you can focus on what you do best already around creating great games.
That's an amazing insight, I guess, Lewis. And with that, I would say thank you so much for this amazing conversation and the very useful insights that you shared. And I would be linking all your social media links and Catheon Gaming's links in the description below, and the users can actually check that out. So thank you so much for this amazing time. Thanks, Lewis.
Yeah, no, and thank you for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. So.